Have you ever heard of the Cemetery of the Lost? I know it sounds like just another one of those urban legends we tell to scare others, but this story is real. I know because I was there. It was a Friday the 13th night, and my friends Lucas, Julia, Rafa, and I decided it would be a good idea to explore the old abandoned cemetery on the outskirts of the city. They say that, long ago, that place was a sanatorium, and the patients who died there never found peace. Curiosity and the desire to feel some adrenaline led us there. When we arrived, the rusty gate creaked loudly as it opened, as if it were trying to warn us not to enter. But, of course, we ignored the warning. Armed with lanterns and courage, or was it foolishness? We stepped into that forgotten sacred ground. The place was shrouded in thick fog, and the cold wind seemed to whisper ancient secrets. The gravestones, worn by time, stood like rotting teeth in an open mouth, ready to devour us. Every step we took echoed in the silent night, creating a symphony of chills. We walked through the tombs, reading the names and dates engraved on the stones. Everything seemed calm, until Lucas found an old mausoleum. The door was ajar, and curiosity overcame common sense. We pushed the heavy door open and entered. The air inside was heavy, almost suffocating. Our lanterns barely illuminated the interior, but we could see the coffins lined up on the stone shelves. Then we heard it. First, it was a faint whisper, almost imperceptible. Then voices, many voices. They seemed to be all around us, coming from every direction. Julia grabbed my arm, and I could feel her trembling. We tried to leave, but the door, which had only been slightly ajar, was now locked. Panic began to set in. Suddenly, one of the coffins started to move. Yes, the lid slowly slid open, as if someone was opening it from the inside. Rafa pointed his lantern at it, and what we saw froze us to the bone. A decomposing body rose, its empty eyes fixed on us. The voices grew louder, a chorus of lost souls demanding their revenge. We ran to the door, banging and screaming, but it wouldn't budge. The creatures began to move closer, slow but determined. Just when it seemed all was lost, the door suddenly opened, and we fell outside, terrified. Without looking back, we ran back to the cemetery gate, hearing the screams and laments echoing in the night. That night in the Cemetery of the Lost never left my mind. The memories haunted me at every moment, especially the loss of Rafa. I decided I needed to go back there to understand what really happened. I couldn't live with this guilt. A few weeks later, I managed to convince Lucas and Julia to return with me. We knew it was crazy, but we couldn't leave Rafa behind, not without trying. Armed with more powerful lanterns, cameras, and even some self-defense weapons, we made our way back to the cemetery. The gate was still there, rusty and as frightening as always. As I pushed it open, a chill ran down my spine. This time, we entered more prepared, but the feeling that something was wrong persisted. The place seemed to be watching us, as if it were waiting for us. We walked in silence, our eyes alert to any movement. The mausoleum where it all began stood there, sinister and imposing. We hesitated for a moment, but we knew we needed to enter. The door was slightly ajar, as if inviting us in. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Unlike the last time, the interior was lit by a faint, ghostly light that we couldn't tell the source of. The voices began again, a constant whisper that seemed to come from the walls. My heart raced as we moved forward, trying to find any clue about Rafa. It was then that we noticed a strange detail. One of the stone shelves was broken, pieces scattered on the floor. In the midst of the debris, something was shining. Lucas approached and picked up the object. It was a necklace, Rafa's necklace. We felt a mixture of hope and fear. He had been here, but where was he now? Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the mausoleum, extinguishing our lanterns. We were plunged into complete darkness, except for the ghostly light that seemed to grow. The voices grew louder, turning into desperate screams. We tried to relight our lanterns, but nothing worked. Then we saw it. At the far end of the mausoleum, a figure began to take shape. It was a woman with long black hair and empty eyes. Her presence was terrifying. She slowly approached, her feet floating above the ground. With each step, the screams grew louder, as if she were pulling the souls of the dead with her. Lucas tried to speak to her, but his voice failed. Julia was paralyzed with fear. I felt like I had to do something. I remembered the stories I had heard about the place. The woman was an old patient from the sanatorium, accused of witchcraft and condemned to die there. Her spirit was trapped, seeking revenge. Desperate, I shouted, "What do you want from us?" The figure stopped, and her empty eyes locked onto mine. "You must free him," she whispered, her voice blending with the screams around us. "Free who?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Rafa," she replied. "He is trapped like me, a lost soul." Suddenly, the figure dissipated, and the darkness took over again. The lanterns flickered back on, and we realized the mausoleum was different. The stone shelves were covered with strange symbols, like marks from some ancient ritual. We knew we had to figure out the meaning of those marks to free Rafa. In the following days, we researched everything we could about the cemetery and the sanatorium. We discovered that the woman was a powerful medium, accused of using black magic to manipulate the souls of the dead. She was buried alive as punishment, and her spirit never found rest. The marks in the mausoleum were part of a ritual she used to try to free herself. With this new information, we returned to the cemetery one last time. We performed the ritual, following every detail we had found. The atmosphere around us changed, as if the very air was charged with electricity. The voices and screams returned, but this time, they seemed to have a direction, a purpose. At the height of the ritual, a bright light filled the mausoleum, blinding us for a moment. When we could see again, Rafa was there, lying on the ground but alive. We ran to him, helping him to his feet. He was disoriented, but he was whole. The woman, the medium, appeared again, but this time her eyes were full of peace. "Thank you," she said, before disappearing forever. We left the cemetery carrying Rafa, feeling an immense relief. But deep down, I knew that this story was still not over. Something told me that the souls of the lost were still not completely at peace, and that one day, perhaps, we would have to return to face the true evil that haunted that place. After rescuing Rafa, we were all relieved, but we couldn't ignore what we had experienced. Rafa, still shaken, told us that during the time he was trapped, he felt constantly watched by something dark, something that seemed older and more malevolent than the medium we tried to free. There was something else in the cemetery of the lost, something that didn't just want revenge, but control. In the days that followed, we tried to return to our routine, but the feeling that we were being watched never went away. Lucas began having nightmares about the cemetery, always waking up sweating and screaming about shadows trying to pull him back. Julia started seeing figures in her house, shadows that disappeared as soon as she tried to focus on them. One day, Rafa called us for an urgent meeting. He had found an old diary in the city library, written by one of the doctors from the sanatorium. The last pages described dark rituals and experiments with the patients, trying to use their spiritual energies to achieve immortality. The diary spoke of an entity called the Guardian, who controlled the cemetery and the souls trapped there. With this new information, we realized that the medium was not the real danger. The Guardian was the evil force that fed the terror in that place. We decided that we couldn't let this continue. We needed to face the Guardian and free all the souls trapped in the cemetery, once and for all. We prepared for the final confrontation. We returned to the cemetery on the night of a full moon, believing that it would be the time of greatest power for the Guardian. Armed with the necessary items for a banishment ritual we found in the diary, we entered the mausoleum once more. As we began the ritual, the entire cemetery seemed to come alive. The voices, the screams, and the very earth trembled beneath our feet. A dark figure began to materialize before us, an overwhelming presence radiating malice. It was the Guardian, and it wasn't willing to let us complete the ritual. The air grew heavy, almost impossible to breathe. The lanterns flickered and went out, leaving us in intermittent darkness. Rafa, with renewed courage, began reciting the words of the banishment, while Lucas and Julia held the protective symbols. I kept my eyes fixed on the dark figure, feeling its hatred piercing us. When Rafa finished the last word, a blinding light erupted from the ground, enveloping the guardian. It let out a deafening scream, and the earth beneath us began to crack open. In the final moment, a spectral hand emerged from the ground and grabbed my ankle, pulling me into the darkness. And that's how we discovered that sometimes freeing souls can come at a high price. What happened to me? Well, that's a story for another night. Thank you for watching another Dark Tales video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any scary stories. See you next time, and beware of the dark.